Final Fantasy XVI is going to be intense. Trailers have emphasized blood, graphic violence, and potentially other explicit content. In fact, it's set to be the first mainline Final Fantasy rated M for mature. The series is over 35 years old, and fans who fell in love with it as kids are now adults in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. The audience has grown up, so is it time for Final Fantasy to grow up too? In a word, no. These games have been telling mature stories for decades, and they haven't needed to rely on violence or other graphic content to do so. Instead, the strongest entries are underpinned by universal themes, beautiful and creative art direction, and convincing characterization. Before we go any further, let me make one thing clear. This video is not a criticism of Final Fantasy XVI or its decision to embrace dark fantasy. I am out of my mind excited for this game. From the dynamic action combat to the gorgeous world, and what little we know of the story, everything looks so impressive that I'm confident it's going to be nothing short of great. Furthermore, evolution is coded into Final Fantasy's DNA. Each new entry is always a reinvention, so I'm happy to accept the change in tone. Frankly, it's necessary given the subject matter. A tale about nations using the fantasy equivalent of nuclear weapons in a war for dwindling natural resources needs some brutality to feel real. There's a line to be drawn, though, between mature content and mature storytelling. When used thoughtfully, violence, blood, gore, sexual themes, and strong language can humanize characters, embellish themes, and help a world feel more believable. But their presence alone doesn't guarantee a sophisticated story. When it comes off as gratuitous, trying too hard to be cool or edgy, it can distract from the narrative or render it juvenile. I'm not worried about this with FF16. Developer Creative Business Unit 3 has an excellent track record, thanks to their work on the formidable Final Fantasy XIV, so I trust that FF16's mature content will be used with intention to present nuanced characters who are transformed in interesting ways by the acts of violence they experience and commit throughout the game. But there are other ways to tell stories for adults. In terms of tone and aesthetic, Final Fantasy IX is pretty family-friendly. The visuals are bright and colorful, the characters cute and cartoony. The harshest profanity you'll hear is damn or bastard, and even those are used sparingly. It's generally lighthearted and wholesome, full of humor, whimsy, and moogles. You can give FF9 to your kids of almost any age, and feel comfortable that they're not going to be scarred by graphic content they're not ready for. I was 12 when it came out, and it immediately became one of my favorite games. I'm 34 now, and it's still one of my favorites. FF9's narrative gets better the older you get, because it's about life and death. Inevitably, your life is going to end, probably sooner than you want it to. That's terrifying, and the game's characters wrestle with that fear throughout the story. Ultimately, they're able to make their lives meaningful by finding the people that make them feel at home and standing by them even through the darkest times. That's not a theme for kids. I certainly didn't appreciate it when I played FF9 for the first few times. But as you get older, and not to get too dark, but as you get closer to dying, you start to think more about these things. Does my life have any meaning? How can I make the most of the time I have? It's scary, it's thought-provoking, and it's universally relatable. Death is also a central theme in Final Fantasy X. Beauty and tragedy coexist in the world of Spira. It's a vibrant island paradise, brimming with culture and history. But the people live in constant fear of Sin, who at any moment could appear and wipe an entire village off the map. This contrast is encapsulated in the unforgettable sending scene, where Yuna guides the souls of the dead to find peace in the afterlife. Without a word of dialogue, this scene conveys so much. The devastation of the villagers, a sense of peace like after a storm passes, Yuna's defiant hope in the face of hopelessness. She wants to be a bastion of strength who inspires the people to hope for a better future, even though she knows that death awaits her at the end of her journey. This is a scene about death, in a game about death, that doesn't show any death. It doesn't need to. The haunting beauty of Yuna dancing on the water, as the souls drift away, tells the story perfectly. A common criticism of Final Fantasy VII Remake is that it pulls its punches, and it's true that it holds back from graphic displays of violence. FF7R is so confident in its characters that it knows it can rely on them to carry the emotional weight of the story. When the plate falls and crushes a city of 50,000 people, we don't see a single dead body or a squirt of blood. Instead, the focus is entirely on the raw emotions of the people suffering through this tragedy. Prior to this event, Barrett has been the personification of strength and conviction. In this moment, he's powerless, having lost his home, his friends, and, he believes, his daughter. All he can do is scream in anguish. Tifa is bereft, scarcely able to speak above a whisper. She takes the blame for the disaster, and the previously unshakable Barrett doubts himself for the first time. Is this all their fault? Both in desperate need of comfort, they embrace, while Cloud looks on helplessly. Like Yuna's sending, this scene doesn't need anything else. John Bentley's powerhouse performance as Barrett expresses the rage, pain, and despair he's feeling far more effectively than a pile of bodies ever could. The focus on believable characters above all else is FF7R's greatest strength, so naturally, one of the few scenes that deviates from that is among the game's least successful. The bloody trail leading from Hojo's lab to President Shinra's office should be eerie, unsettling, and horrifying, but the imagery isn't strong enough to hammer home those feelings. There's actually quite a lot of blood smeared across the floor, but it's hidden underneath even more glow-in-the-dark alien goo. There's no blood at all before this moment, so a sudden pop of bright red would make for a visceral shock to the senses and elevate the tension of the scene. This is one trick that FF7R, unfortunately, misses. In contrast, Final Fantasy XIV understands how to make a little blood go a long way. So much of FF14's narrative is driven by rich world building, but the Garlemald chapter in Endwalker succeeds because it's all about grounded human drama. The Garleans are on their last legs, freezing, starving, and dying in an abandoned subway station. Those who would seek vengeance against the Warrior of Light for her transgressions against them are too weak to even stand and face her. Their commander has a desperate final plan to turn the tide in their favor, but when it falls through, the shame is too great to bear. He loads a single bullet into his gun, points it at his head, and we cut away. When we cut back, his body lays motionless at the foot of the Imperial banner, now stained with a splash of crimson. Endwalker smartly balances this grim scene out with some warmth. Literally, as shortly thereafter we see former foes finding respite together, thanks to the comfort of warm soup. FF14 goes to some dark places, but by not relying too heavily on graphic violence, and by keeping it tasteful when they do get violent, moments like this stand out and make a memorable impact. Mature storytelling comes in many forms. It's exciting to see Final Fantasy XVI break new ground for the series. The decision to go darker and more violent than ever before may well raise the stakes and boost the intensity of the story. That said, if the game is going to be great, and I believe it will be, it won't be because of blood or guts, or because the characters can say fuck now. It will be because it delivers characters and a story that make players feel and think. They take different routes to get there, but that's what all the best Final Fantasies do.